Now, the Steinhoff saga is possibly one of the biggest cases of corporate fraud in South Africa's business history, which saw the company's share price collapsing and almost killing the company, if you like. Co-author of a research study on Steinhoff and Professor of Leadership and Organizational Behavior at the University of Stellenbosch Business School, Professor Mias de Klerk, is on the line and he joins me now. Professor, thank you for your time. Let's begin, I think, by laying out what you guys found out in terms of your study into Steinhoff, which of course we know is still continuing.
Good afternoon, Godfrey. Yes, the study that we did was done on the information that is available in the public sector at this stage, because as you know, there are also still some informal studies going on. But we felt that we need to do this study and get to some lessons while we're waiting for the formal studies to conclude their results. Now, some of the things that came out from our study was, for instance, that the way that the board acted did present some questionable behaviors. For instance, the independency of the directors on the board, the length of service that they had, which also influenced the independency. Those are some of the big concerns that came out from our study. We also looked at behavior. Now, again, as I said, we had to work with information in the public domain, but the behavior that happens from what we can see, some questionable behaviors as well from CEO, from board members, which we don't try and establish to project blame on everyone, but more to understand how it can also happen in other places.
Right. So it's interesting that you point to those two things, because you're talking about behavior, which we know can affect anyone because people are different. And you also talk about the issue of the board and its constitution. So it does seem to me that you are suggesting that perhaps the company structure as we know it may also have failed us here. Or was it mostly a case of individuals?
I think it's more a case of individuals. You see, if one look at the structure and the structure of the board, they tended to comply with most of the regulations. But there's a difference between compliance and ethical or moral behavior. You can comply with all the regulations, all the requirements, but still then, because of people, not do what you are supposed to do while you are complying to the regulations.
Yeah. You also talk about an interesting aspect in this where you say you also looked in particular on business leadership. And one, you talk about the ambiguity of charismatic leadership. And secondly, the rationalization strategy typically adopted by leaders who lose their moral compass. Tell me what you found about those two aspects.
As a leader, you need a certain amount of charisma.
Yeah.
So that you have an influence over people, that they want to follow you, they want to work with you, they want to go with you in the company. But if the charisma becomes too strong, your followers tend to follow blindly and not critically think about what is happening, where you're going, what you're doing. And it looks like this has been the case in Steinhoff as well, where Mr. Jooste was very charismatic, had a very strong followership, but probably too few people who questioned some of the things that was happening, that had a critical thinking around that. Now, if the charisma then gets augmented with other behaviors, for instance, you talked about the rationalization, and we can't say this is what happened, but Mr. Jooste was very successful in his early career. That can create the perception that one is invincible and that you can become more and more successful and not always doing the right thing. Or you start concluding a deal with maybe a certain action or behavior that is not the right way to do, but you get away with it. And it slowly but surely becomes a way of being and a way of working. And that then lure you into more and more questionable behavior.
Yeah. Now, Steinhoff, of course, is a public company, and it was scrutinized by some very learned minds and some very sharp minds from the investment community. Did you and your colleagues manage to look into the behavior of that aspect of the market as well? Was there market failure on that front? I am going to concede, because I reported on Steinhoff for a number of years, and I remember attending those briefings and writing stories about the deals that were being done by Mr. Juster, and I certainly was singing his praises.
Godfrey, I think what we have here, we did not specifically research that.
Okay.
But I think what we have here is what is called the halo effect. When something is going well with an organization or an individual, we tend to project that everything is going well with that organizational individual. And we, even if some questionable things happens, we tend to ignore that rather than being as critical as what we should be. In the Steinhoff case, I think the danger lights were flashing for several years.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that the German government had a raid on their offices a few years ago. But in the halo effect, we accept the very brief explanations that Mr. Juster and the board then gives, that no, everything is above board. We can accept that. Even if they state in their financial reports every year almost exactly the same statement, that directors are independent, the deals are above board, and then we just lose our critical thinking. So I think we are all a bit to blame in what happened here, not challenging enough and just accepting that everything was going well.
Absolutely. We was blinded by the light, I can add, and my head is down. Just quickly, Prof, perhaps three key takeaways for you from the mini study that you did on Steinhoff.
Okay. I think first one, I would like to say that we must realize in all organizations that growth does not necessarily equal profits or success. Growth can make us blind for what's actually happening, and then, as in the case of Steinhoff, then we see the real success was not there. When strong governance is absolutely important in all organizations, but it's not about complying to regulations. Yeah. Strictly, it is about complying to the spirit of the regulations and still doing the right thing, not just ticking the right boxes. And then the whole thing about charismatic leadership, not to be blinded by very strong charismatic leaders, because the last point is we all can be corrupted. We should not, but we are human and we can fail. And we should not just blame other people for doing that. We've got it in our making. Yeah. So let's learn from this and become stronger and make sure that we don't get lured down in the same path.
Absolutely, and we must take very important lessons arising out of this. We were all blinded by the man. No question about it. Professor, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much, Godfrey.
That's Professor Mias de Klerk from the University of Stellenbosch.